I remember going to being sent to a Sunday school by my mum, and we'd made these cheese scones. And when I got home, all I wanted to do was eat all of them. I didn't want to share them because I thought I'd made them.
I got onto other drugs later because the alcohol wasn't doing it enough for me then, and as soon as I tried stronger drugs once, then I loved them, and I never really stopped taking them then for a long time. So.
I mean, yeah, I've put down thousands and thousands of pounds on one hand of blackjack, for example. It's hard to say, you know, I mean, again, it's all relative.
By the time I was 18, I would say I was pretty much a daily drinker. I had the bottles of wine, you know, after tea.
Can you just take me through a day in your life at the peak of your addiction?
I was a police officer for nearly 20 years, and you know, there were times where I would be checking my phone and concentrating on my bets, where I should have been concentrating on other things. If I was in between jobs, I'd be pulling over to check or to put more bets on. I'd then, you know, I'd get home. I could sit for hours, I could be absolutely shattered after a shift, and I could still come home and gamble on my iPad or on my phone, on the blackjack table, online. It was just a continual obsession with gambling. I couldn't put it down. I literally could not put it down. It was constant. I was always wanting to, if I didn't have a bet on something, there was something, you know, it felt like there was something wrong. It's like, why haven't you, I always had a bet running at some point, always, it was constant.
Towards the end of my drinking, basically I would get up, I would have a drink no matter what time it was. So whether I woke up at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, I would have to have a drink. I would then carry on having maybe a bottle of wine or two. Then my children would get up. I would make sure they were sent to school sometimes, and they do share these stories, so I'm not sharing anything they don't know. They will have stayed off school to look after me if I was hungover or if I was ill or if I just couldn't function. They would miss days off school. My daughter would get phoned from her school to pick the other two little ones up because I wasn't there. I wasn't able to look after my children, which is what brought my eldest to the point of saying, you know, you're done, or we are. And then I would just carry on drinking. Once the children were home, if there was alcohol, there was always alcohol in the house, I would be able to hide it. I knew all the hiding places. There's a joke in the house where I went upstairs with a bottle of vodka for a bath, and I came down with a bottle of Baileys. And I don't remember that. There's a lot of things in their family that they talk about stories. I don't remember them. There was a lot of blackout in my drinking.
So the drugs that I liked the most were stimulant drugs, which would mainly be amphetamine, speed, or cocaine. And if, for example, if you take speed, then you can easily stay up for 3 nights or longer. You definitely stay awake for at least 1 night. Impossible to sleep. And you feel very, very euphoric. You feel very powerful, but you also feel quite anxious. As you stay awake longer, the paranoia kicks in. And so then I would self-medicate that with alcohol or they're called benzodiazepines, so things like Valium, Xanax, things like that. They're like downer drugs. They would sort of calm me down, or they'd help me to get to sleep. So if I was taking stimulant drugs, then it would usually start at a party or something like that, and the party would go on all night, and then presumably because of my addictive personality, when everybody else would like go home to bed and go to work, I'd just carry on taking drugs, and I would keep taking them until I couldn't take any more, until I fell asleep. So yeah, a lot of it was just spending lots of time with friends, watching television and things like that, watching films, listening to music. But what happens invariably with addiction is that it starts to take over your life.
The stimulants and stuff, which is not easy to get. So the ones that you can get from like prescription,
yeah,
obviously you can get that from a doctor. But the other ones, how would you get your hands on that? Because I don't imagine that is easy.
Well, that's an interesting point actually. So obviously, if you go to a drug dealer, then your drug dealer might have ecstasy, cocaine, might have some Valium, things like that. But I was quite computer savvy, and so I got most of my, not for the entire time of my addiction, but the time when I was mostly addicted to lots of different things, I was getting drugs off the internet, which is considerably easier than people think. So basically the darknet is just encrypted internet. So it's just like going on a normal internet browser, but all your internet traffic is encrypted, and you go onto a website which is pretty much exactly the equivalent of eBay or Amazon, but instead it's just listings of drugs and weapons and fake passports and things like that. So once I discovered that, rather than doing just sort of the standard cocaine, amphetamine drugs, I got access to all kinds of other things. So like a whole range of psychedelic drugs, ketamine, which I had a massive problem with at one point, all different kinds of things that you couldn't even imagine became possible. And you purchase those using Bitcoin. So you go on a site, you buy the Bitcoin, you go onto the drug site, you buy the drugs, you pay for the drugs. The funds stay in what's called an escrow, so that the dealer doesn't get them until you receive the product. And it cuts out the middleman. Going to buy drugs off dealers is horrible because half of them are trying to con you, half of them are giving you stuff that isn't what it says it is. But if you buy drugs off the darknet, then there's ratings from other customers and everything. So I must have bought drugs hundreds of times. I've very rarely been scammed buying drugs on the internet, and they literally arrive in an envelope at your front door. So I could order anything that I wanted, and within 2 or 3 days it was delivered to my door by the postman. I'd spend all my wages on it when I was working. On a couple of occasions inherited some money. I spent all of that money. Whatever money I got, if I wasn't working, I'd spend my benefits on it. Any money that I could get, I would spend on it. And if I didn't have money, then I've stolen before in the past. When I was in a very bad way, I've stolen things to buy drugs as well. So your whole moral compass eventually becomes trashed because addiction comes before family, friends, anything else. Sourcing whatever substances you need takes the priority. So the moral issues of stealing don't factor into your thinking at all at that point, which is bad, but that's the truth.
What do you spend on average every day?
Well, that is a question and a half. I don't know about it's hard to say what an average is, because some days you'd win, some days you'd lose, but over the course of time you were always lost. What I can say, it's hard to say an average, because some days it might be 20, 30 quid, depending on what I was doing. I would always have the bet on, but if I had time to myself, it would be more. I would gamble more. If I was out with friends, if I was out with family or things like that, I'd put the bets on earlier, and then it would be harder to access my phone. I would still do it, but that would limit, or it would restrict how much I could spend. If I had free reign, it could be hundreds, it could be thousands of pounds, easily.
I didn't understand what alcoholic seizures were, and I was having seizures quite a lot, and you kind of learn to find an excuse for them. So we put them down to panic attacks when they first started, and the doctor prescribed me like a tablet to kind of calm those, because I wasn't honest about my drinking, and that's a very big trait in alcoholics. We're very sneaky, and we can pull a yarn to tell you completely something that we want you to believe. And I wasn't honest with my doctor, and he said, oh, it's just panic attacks. And they start because your body's not getting enough alcohol, and if I wasn't having enough alcohol, you can guarantee I was having seizures. And as I said, we thought they were panic attacks. So other effects of your alcoholism is seizures. Obviously you get the shakes come in quite quickly when you become addicted to something. If you don't have it enough, you lose the ability to just function. You can't do anything. And when I say that, I couldn't even make a cup of coffee without thinking, oh, I can put a whiskey in it. I'd go for a bath, I'd need a drink to go for a bath. You just become completely dependent.
And it would always be about, if there was a dessert or something at home, how could I how could I have a big piece, or how could I get in the kitchen when everybody's finished and sneak another piece. So it was always about sneaking as much as I could and having as much as I could and thinking about sweet things. And as I got older, really sneaking into the kitchen to go in the baking cupboard. And I love baking as well. I used to bake with my mum, but then I'd always bake as an excuse to be able to eat sweet things. So, I'll make a cake for everybody, but really it was so I could have cake or sweet things. I love cooking, and there were always things in the cupboards, and I'd kind of as I got a bit older to sort of teenage, when it started really becoming a bit problematic, I would go and open tins of condensed milk. I don't know if you know that milk that's got the sugar in it, and just to eat it out of the tin. So I mean, it was, from very young and all through my childhood, I was very focused on sweet things, but not just sweet things, processed foods and high carbohydrate food, biscuits. I loved anything like scones with butter on, anything like that. Yeah, really, food has always been a big focus.
What is the most regrettable experience you had while dealing with your addiction? For me,
when I was in my late 20s, I inherited some money off a family member, and I went on a massive cocaine binge. And cocaine is so expensive that it's quite difficult to abuse normally because of the price. But suddenly I had this lump of money and I just went crazy on it. When it wore off, I started to suffer with really bad anxiety, paranoia, and I started drinking alcohol, and it was like more and more and more and more and more. I was downing bottles of vodka. I was like unable to sleep for more than an hour because I would wake up with the shakes, and I ended up in hospital, and they put me on benzodiazepines again. It's called Librium. And they were giving me the maximum that they could, but it wasn't really touching me because of the level of the withdrawal that I was in. And every second of every day during that time was agony for me. And I didn't realise it at the time, but the doctor came to visit me in the hospital. I was in a ward full of people with liver problems. I had what's called alcohol-induced hepatitis, which is different to if you catch hepatitis through an infection. It's acute. So I had a massively expanded liver, and the doctor, this may have been shock tactics to a certain extent, but he came to me and he asked me, how old was your mother when she died? And I said she was 51. And they said, well, you're 29, and if you carry on this way, you are probably going to die before you're 30. And that scared me, because I didn't want to die. But I still did go back to drugs and alcohol again after that point. So that would be one of many, many occasions.
There's been a lot of painful moments, to be fair, some more painful than others, and some more painful for others as well. It's not just about me, it's about people around me as well. Painful ones, just ones that I look back on now, and I think, a suicide attempt and then gambling immediately after that, sort of in the hotel bed. The hospital bed rather, just after that, when you look back, that was a dark moment. Times where there was one occasion where I've drove my car where I know I shouldn't have drove my car because I'd drank alcohol, more alcohol than I should have done to drive. And I drove only a mile or so down the road to the train station. Not an excuse, I still shouldn't have done it, but I did that to get the last train to the casino, knowing full well that was the last train. I had no way of coming back until the following morning, so subconsciously I knew I was going for the night. Loads of other times as well where I've sort of been with my daughter. I've been present but not present. I've been there in person but not in mind, and things like that. They're the more important ones. They're particularly painful when you look back on. I've always been there. I've never neglected my daughter or anything like that, far from it. But I feel like I could and should have done more had I not been so distracted by the gambling, which was an absolute constant throughout, the vast majority of my life.
How long have you spent in a casino before? What's the longest period you've ever spent in a casino?
In a casino, best part of 24 hours on occasions. I've been in there for 17, 18, 19, 20 hours because you've got no concept of time in there. And for me particularly, I just become utterly immersed in the casino. I'm just absolutely in the zone, completely focused on the gambling. there's no clocks, there's no windows, you've got no concept of time, and that's how they want it. They will bring you drinks, they'll bring you offer you things to eat. I've sat in there from morning, noon, right through tonight. I've sat there for hours and hours and hours. Like I say, pushing up 24 hours on occasions where you just continued. I've drunk myself sober almost in there in casinos in the past. You just lose concept of time entirely.
If you were to put a number on how many drugs you've tried, do you have a number?
I can't think of. So the only drug that I haven't tried is heroin, and so I had two rules. Is perhaps the wrong word, but when I was taking all these different drugs, there were two things that I would never do. I would never inject, because I thought it was disgusting. I didn't like the thought of it. I don't like the sight of blood, and I know that injecting anything is the best way to become addicted to it. And I would never take heroin because I was scared. I'd seen people die on heroin. I've seen people in horrendous states.
I didn't have any education around alcoholism. I didn't have education around what the effects of my drinking was doing to me, myself, my body, and everybody else around me. And towards the end, I would need a lot, and when I say a lot for a woman, I would need 4 cans in the morning. So I would start off with maybe 4 cans of Worthies, 4 cans of something else. I would have wine at 11 o'clock. We would go on to cocktails in the afternoon, back to vodka at dinner time. And then I would probably have a couple of bottles of cider maybe after the kids had gone to bed, and top it off with a bottle of whiskey. Might not drink the whole bottle of whiskey because I would need some for the morning, and and I say this because that's what I needed, I needed that.
My relapse happened Christmas 2019. I had self-excluded on Christmas Day 2018 for 12 months, and I spent that entire year gamble-free, completely abstinent. Felt really good, felt really proud of myself. I felt, things were going well. As it got closer to Christmas Day 2019, I started to question myself, thinking, well, maybe I've cracked it, maybe I've sorted it, I'm in control now, maybe I can have a couple of quid on the darts, on the football, things like that over Christmas. And so when my self-exclusion period ended on Christmas Day 2019, I contacted GamStop and asked for the self-exclusion to be removed. They did that. I had to wait 24 hours, ring them back, but I ended up removing the self-exclusion and then tried going back into my old accounts, and none of the gambling operators would allow me to go back into their account, into the accounts, because my previous gambling had been too erratic. So it was then I thought that I couldn't gamble because I didn't have nowhere to do it, and I saw an advert on the telly for Virgin at the time, Virgin Betting, Virgin Gaming, whatever it were called, and I'd never had an account with them. So I opened an account, and it was using my credit card, because this was just before the credit card ban came in, where you could still gamble on your credit card. And I had a couple of quid on the darts. I had £5 accumulator on the football for a week or so afterwards. I thought that was it, the darts finished, and within a couple of hours I was back on the blackjack table, and I spent a few £1,000s on my credit card. And I just felt absolutely awful, because I felt like I'd ruined the last 12 months. I felt like I'd wasted my time. I felt like I'd spoiled everything. And so I self-excluded again this time for 5 years. I went back on GamStop, self-excluded for 5 years, and if I could have done it for life, I would have done, no two ways about it. Sort of confessed again to my partner and says, I've done it again, but from that point on, there's been no looking back. And that, I don't recommend relapse, far from it, but for me, it was a defining moment, because I now know that I can't gamble. It's as simple as that.
Well, I think if I look back, there were certain events that happened which planted seeds at the time, which later made me realise. So,
and why was this period different than the other periods?
Well, I have a degree. I'm a translator by trade. I'm a reasonably intelligent person, but I was not making good choices in my life. My intelligence was not helping me at all, because I was just completely focused on the addiction. And an addict all addicts are selfish because their primary purpose in life is feeding their addiction, and so any moral values they may have come secondary to that. But I ended up getting done for drugs offence, getting prosecuted for a drugs offence. I was on probation, and while I was on probation, I was still abusing drugs. By this point, I'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia. If you have schizophrenia and you abuse drugs and you don't take your medication, you are asking for trouble. There were I've had several rock bottoms. The rock bottom that really got me clean was the fear. Fear is a powerful motivator, and even though the fear was irrational, it didn't feel, it felt real to me. So I had like all kinds of horrendous visions of people attacking me and doing all kinds of horrible things. And it's just like, that is just utterly mentally draining to live with all the time. And even now, after 4 years of sobriety, I still have schizophrenia, and I can have moments of tranquility and peace and calm, but sometimes I just become overwhelmed by this fear that something bad's going to happen. And I know enough about my own condition now to know that it's an irrational fear, but that doesn't make it any less difficult.
My last rock bottom, absolutely. It was extremely emotional, you know. It was my last drink. It was my last day of drinking, and it was my middle daughter's birthday, and I'd gone out the night before, said I was only going out for a couple. That never happened. I don't ever know why people say, I'm only going out for 2, because you know that you are not going out for 2. You know, and I could never just have 2. And I was like, yeah, I promise I'll be home. Broken promises again. I got home early. I was a mess, absolute mess. And my eldest daughter had a hospital appointment for a brain scan because we thought she had a brain tumour. I didn't make it. And I remember those text messages. I remember her feeling let down. I remember the hurt in those text messages. At the time, I was fighting. I was fighting hard to get a drink. As much as I wanted to be there for my daughter, the drink was really battling with me. And I remember my ex-husband having to put me in the shower. We were fighting over a bottle of vodka. And yeah, I met my eldest daughter in town and I was having seizures. We were sat in Subway and I was having seizure after seizure after seizure. I had to go into the bathroom to be sick, and she left. She left Subway. She said, I can't do this anymore. And I didn't get it. I didn't get it then. Even then I couldn't see how poorly I was. I knew she was upset, and I was upset that she was upset, but in my head then, I didn't know what she was exactly upset over. My friend was with us and we went back to the house. She put me in bed and she said, just stay there. She decorated the house with balloons and banners, and she got the house ready for the little one coming home for her birthday. I got up at tea time and we were going out for a meal with the family, and that was when my eldest daughter stood in front of me at the pub and said, you know, I've got something to say. And I was like, what do you want to say? And she said, you take another drink. She said, and I'm taking the kids. And I remember thinking, oh. And I just stood there and I froze. And her partner said, that's a bit harsh. And I went, no, she's right. I said, she's actually right. And I remember going to the bar, because I was going to the bar to get the drinks. And I remember standing at the bar and my knuckles holding on to that. There was a gold bar on there. And I remember how cold that was. And I was gripping for dear life. I think that was my moment of surrender. Right there and then was like, and they told me later on, I don't remember the whole night. This is how it's been relayed to me, because I don't remember all of this. I remember the feelings, I remember the emotion, and I remember the fear of me taking another drink. And my middle daughter, whose birthday it was, said everybody was looking at me because I went down and sat with a J2O and I didn't have an alcoholic drink. And she said, and everybody was looking. And I didn't notice that everybody was looking because obviously I didn't know that I had a problem. Everybody else kind of knew apart from me. My denial was huge. I am not even lying. My denial around my alcoholism was so deep. We actually got the whole way home without me having a drink. And I remember thinking, how do I get through the night? How do I wake up in the morning without a drink? And I did. I woke up in the morning, I didn't have a drink. I'm not going to tell, I was so ill. I was so poorly, the shakes, the tears, the fear, everything, the sickness that came with that is, and I would not recommend white knuckling it to anybody, especially the amount of alcohol I was drinking. And when people say to me, how did you stop? And I say, I just stopped. I was so wrapped up in it, I didn't know how dangerous that was. Would I do it now? No. I would not put my body through what I put my body through then, but I was so naive. I'm into recovery and I had to throw away the empties. That was a shock, because I can't even tell you how many wash baskets that are this high were full, bin bags, there was so much. And I was like, oh, is this just off me? And I was just like, oh, okay, you know, and that's how wrapped up in it that you get. You just don't see that you've had 4 bottles of wine for breakfast. You don't see that you've had like a bottle of vodka before bed. It just becomes that normal to you that you just live in it. And there's nothing that kind of shocks you until you become sober and you go, oh, really? I did that? Oh, sorry, did I do that as well? It's like, yeah, sobriety teaches you a lot about yourself, you know?
It gets worse before it gets better when you stop taking drugs. If you can get through that first phase, then your life starts to improve and you start to see...
What is that phase like when you stop? Is it like...
When you first stop?
Is it like physically, are you going through
With
shivers or whatever?
Well, that depends on the drug. The physical withdrawal doesn't usually last that long, but the mental health part of it does. So one of the main reasons people take drugs, and it's not that often spoken about, is boredom, pure boredom. Drugs make normal things more interesting, that's the truth. So overwhelming boredom, like I had a depression that was just like being knocked out by a tractor and I just couldn't get up. It was just horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. And yeah, it took me a long time, but after 15 years of addiction, where I was constantly chasing the next high all the time, it's hard work. It's hard work being an addict, and it is draining physically and mentally. I started to realise little things like stability and sobriety can be fun as well.
I went to a fellowship meeting and I remember the excitement I felt on the way to that meeting, thinking, I'm gonna get a drink. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get a drink. They're gonna serve me a drink at this meeting. And I went to the meeting and I sat there, people told their story, and the guy brought me a glass of water, and I have never felt anger like I did that moment, because I thought I was gonna get a drink of alcohol, and I was so angry. I was like, this is it, I'm never gonna drink again, am I? And they said, no, not if you wanna live. And I was just like, boof, right, here it is, it's real. And I remember phoning my ex-husband on the way home going, guess what? And he said, what? And I went, I'm an alcoholic. And he went, really? He said, you've clicked on after 16 years? And I was like, yeah, I have.
Which is kind of two, is what's the hardest part of your recovery? And I've said this because, you know, this is an ongoing series about addiction. And the lady before was saying that abstinence is literally the only cure. Do you agree? Like, do you, like, you'll have to stay away from alcohol now and forevermore? Yeah,
I would never, ever take a drink. God forbid that would happen. You know, I live a 12-step fellowship life, and it is a very big part of my life. I have to live it daily. And
do you think about it every day?
What, alcohol?
Yeah.
I'm an alcoholic. Do I think about drinking it? No, no, sometimes I'm like, if a new drink comes out, I'm like, oh, I never got to try that, or like I have a friend who we go gigging with and she'll say, oh, do you mind going and get me a pint from the bar? And I'm like, no. And the other week was the first time ever that I looked at it and I thought, oh, that looks actually quite nice. But it was because I knew what it was. I knew my trigger from it. It was a smell. It wasn't the taste or the effect. It was a smell because it was a fruity smell. And I was like, oh, that smells like mango. It wasn't the fact that, oh, that smells like alcohol. So if she had a nice pop that smelled the same way, I would have probably felt the same thing.
How does it feel knowing that you can never gamble again?
I'm totally comfortable. Totally comfortable knowing that I can't gamble again. I've got no desire, I've got no wish, I've no need to gamble. I could not be more comfortable knowing that without, touch wood, without complacency, I will never gamble again. And I'm happy with that. The relapse that I spoke about earlier, when I had that one night, I'd done a year of complete abstinence, was super proud of myself, thought, and I thought I'd cracked it, I suppose. Thought I was able to have just a little bit here and a little bit there, and I proved to myself on that night that I can't. And that is why I am now so comfortable knowing that I can't gamble, because had that night have not happened, perhaps at the back of my mind now, I might still be sat wondering, I've done such a long time now, maybe will it kill? It's not gonna hurt to have a little bit here. But I know, because of that one night, I know that it would, because if I had £5 today, it'd be £10 tomorrow, and then it'd be £20 an hour after that, and then I proved that to myself. So the fact that I now know that I can't gamble, I am totally comfortable with that. I don't have any desire to do it again.
Do you ever think about drugs? Do you ever think about alcohol? Do you ever think about, anything like that? Or is it just like, abstinence is the only cure, or is it all gone?
Drugs, in the right quantities, under the right circumstances, are great fun. Not going to lie about that. Some of the best experiences in my life have been under the influence of drugs, but some of the worst ones have also been under the influence of drugs. And the fact of the matter is that these substances, if you take too many of them, they can cause permanent problems. They can kill you. They've given me a mental health condition that I'll have for the rest of my life. It's a difficult subject because my dad, for example, he likes a pint of beer, but he'll never drink more than 2 or 3 pints ever. He'll never drink at home, never ever displayed any signs of developing addiction. So I absolutely believe that alcohol plays more of a good role in his life than a bad role. But it also killed my mum. And when you die from alcohol-related illness, it is a slow, painful, and it's a horrible death, because when your liver stops functioning, then it can't clean toxins out of your system, so you get brain damage. So I remember going to visit my mum in the hospital before she died, and there would be times when she'd be very lucid and have a normal conversation, and there'd be other times when she was like off with the aliens talking about people spying on her, and one time she said she'd seen us on the television talking about her, which ironically is what I'm doing now. But
so it's just, you just never think about it anymore.
I think about it all the time, but my life is better now than it's ever. I wouldn't say I'm like crazy happy. I mean, I have to accept that when I look and compare myself to my friends, most of them have got kids and families, mortgages and things like that. I mean, because of my addiction, because of my drug abuse and gambling and various things, I have huge debts that I'm paying off very, very slowly. My credit rating is absolutely useless. I have no way of getting on the property ladder. So I'm not that life is a race, but like I'm behind where I want to be. But I'm happier now than I've ever been before, and that is down mainly to abstinence and making good choices, I think.